Back at it again. So
Back
I'm
and
gonna
better.
jump. I'm gonna jump right in because we cooking today. So first of all, let's address where we're coming from. So Zuri, where are you and what's the time zone?
Well, I'm in Atlanta. I'm in
Mm-hmm.
Eastern,
Mm, mm.
greatest city alive.
Talk. Marcus Kamau, talk to me. Where are you and what's the time zone? What time is it over there?
We're in speaking for myself, I'm in Puerto Vallarta, Mexico.
Mm.
The time is Central Time. So I'm feeling pretty good.
Marcus, where do you happen to be as well?
Speaking for myself, I'm in Puerto Vallarta as
Talk.
well. It is 4:57 here, so yeah, I'm feeling really good, man. Central Time,
Well,
feeling
and
pretty good.
I'm telling you, and I know where I'm going somewhere with this. I am the most blessed man alive. The time is now 11:57 p.m. I'm in
Mm.
the United Kingdom,
Oof.
London. Whew, so real international. And that leads me into our first question, right? Because we've seen a lot of the world. We're in different parts of the world. And this is my science teacher bag. It's something called the Flea experiment. So first thing you need to know about fleas, they can jump 50 times their height. 50 times their height. And a scientist wanted to do an experiment. So he put these fleas in a jar, like
Mm.
something maybe a little bit bigger than this. And he sealed the jar. Fleas only live for 3 months. They lived in that jar for 3 days, jumping their highest, jumping their highest, jumping their highest. So you have to understand 3 days is like years to a flea. When he opened the jar after 3 days, those fleas never jump out again. Even though they're born to jump 50 times their height, these creatures that are almost too small to see to the eye will never jump out of the jar again. And here's the difference. Here's what he didn't expect. Even their kids
Mm.
will never jump out of the jar. That will be forever their limit. But we know science, life, there's always exceptions to the rule. So here's a two-part question to kick us off. First of all, do you believe that you are a flea that has jumped out of the jar? Look at the limitations that have been put on your parents, generations in your life. Do you feel like I'm a flea, the exception that has jumped out of the jar? And then secondly, if you feel like, yeah, I'm for sure out the jar, how do you feel about your family, your friends, your loved ones still in the jar? How are you approaching that situation? Two-part question. Number one, are you out the jar? Or are you still jumping, trying to figure it out? And if you are out of the jar, based on your family, what are you doing about your loved ones still in the jar? How are you approaching that? What does that look like for you?
To
Ooh, I
to
told
kick us
y'all. Go
off,
ahead, cook,
That's
yeah, to
cook.
nice.
kick us off, to answer the latter statement, uh, to answer the latter statement, the way that I am approaching people who are still in the jar, or who, what what those conversations are like. Um, I think I'm coming from a place of empathy, very empathetically. Am I having those conversations? Because what I've found is being outside the jar and be like, ha ha, look at the beach, everything's the sun, the weather's popping, my skin's popping. Like, look at what outside the jar looks like. I found that that can only inspire to a certain degree, and that can only inspire when somebody is in a place where they're willing to receive inspiration. But there's a lot of times where people are so stuck in the jar and in trying to figure out the next thing in front of them, the next thing they got to do, that it's like I don't got time to be worrying about, you know, being in London, being in Mexico, being in Africa. Like I got shit that I need to take care of tomorrow, this evening, tomorrow
Mm-hmm.
morning. And
Mm-hmm.
so when those times come where they're willing to dream, I'm the first person I want you to call. Like, call me. Let's dream together. Let's dream.
Mm,
Like I'm here to kind of spark that fire, because I know that that's where it starts. But at the same time, being empathetic to the jar life, because I spent my whole life in it. Um, and I definitely feel like I have jumped out the jar. And it wasn't easy jumping out the jar. And I felt like I felt resistance, and I would go past it a mental resistance, but there was real resistance from other fleas that were in the jar, from systems that kept the jar together. Like there was resistance to get out the jar, no doubt about it. But I'm out that mug, and I'm happy to be out here. But I guess the people I'm talking to who are still in it, I think it starts with dreaming. So that's what I try to get them to do.
I think the first question you have to ask yourself is, what type of jar are you in? Are you in a physical jar that has those physical limitations that you can't reach up? Or are you in an emotional trauma and baggage type of jar? And I think once you figure out what jar that is, you know if you have made it out the jar or if you are still trying to make it out the jar. And for me, for my personal, to answer that question, I'm definitely out of the jar, but that came with looking within and looking that I did not like my emotional environment around me or that I was brought up in. But I didn't realize that until I got older, until I was not an oblivious teenager anymore, until I realized that the environment I was brought up in, a lot of people looked at it as a white picket fence. But as I got older, God showed me that it was actually a dismantled white picket fence. And I had to be okay with that, right? And that is the jar. So when you were reading that blurb, Tunji, I literally looked at my life from what it was and what it is now, but what I'm still trying to get out of. It was what I grew up in was like a jar, definitely, but it was a dismantled white picket fence that surrounded the perimeter of that jar. And a lot of people looking in saw only the white picket fence, right? But because I was in the jar with windows and I could see the ceiling and I knew there was something else out there. I knew there was more experiences outside of this jar that I could, be emotionally aware with individuals around me, be able to speak up and be able to be loved how I want to be loved, right? That might not be the correct way for someone else, but it is for Zuri. And once I got out of that jar, I was able now to reach back and, bring family members with me and start talking about what it's like to show love correctly, to show love, even if you don't understand a family member, even if you don't like a family member ways. Being out of the jar for me is having those tough conversations with family members and having that grace to forgive them. That's being out of the jar for me. And I definitely am out of the jar, but it's a hard task bringing those other fleas with me that I love and that love me, but just sometimes can't love me correctly, right? But you have to still move forward.
That's nice. I'm just wondering why the scientists couldn't use bees, man. I've killed so many fleas in this past day that I just feel like those could have been my cousins. I could have been killing my family. I couldn't use bees. Fleas eat shit. That in and of itself, I could dive down in that. But I I think I'm in a mix between both answers, right? I think that you have to first define the jar, um, because I think whatever it is, whether it's mental, emotional, physical, there's a limitation there. There's a there, right? And I think through the process of recognizing that you're a flea, and knowing what that presents you, like knowing what you got to work with, one has to then ask himself, am I using all the guys? And if you know, because I've jumped higher than this jar before, I don't know how I got in this jar. A flea like me is waiting for the jar to open. I'm gonna keep looking. The jar is gonna open, and I'm out of here. See, that because again, the fleas were placed in the jar. That's a very high point for me. They were placed in the jar, so they knew their capacity before they got in.
Yeah.
So you have to ask yourself, am I going to adjust, right, and become less of who I am, or am I going to be who I am in the jar? And so I think my answer is like just more of a conscious coupling of both of the answers that we've heard. I think they got out the jar. in a lot of ways. I think in a lot of ways I'm out of the jar. I think in some ways, if I'm candid, I'm still aware of the jar. You know, um, I'm still aware of the jar because a part of me is still there with the family because we're connected. A part of me longs to have them with me outside of the jar. But I also know that mm, it takes a lot. It takes a lot to be willing to be different, to
Mm.
be willing um, to acknowledge yourself amongst your kinsmen. Because, yeah, it takes a lot to recognize that I am of you, but not of
We're
you. I'm
not the
here, but
same.
I'm not here. And part of it is for me, it's such a deep question, right? And it's not. It's just like flies in a jar, right? Fleas in a jar. But to me, my brain breaks it up, and I'm like, part of it is a bit of self denial. I know I'm a flea. I know I can jump 5 times or 50 times my height, but somehow I've fallen into this jar. So then it's like, how do I then survive in this jar? And the expectation for this lid to be taken off this jar. So there's a lot of different ways I can take that. But I definitely think I'm out of the jar and long, deeply long to have my family out of the jar. But I understand that life is an individual experience that we share in the best way that we can. And the tradition that have protected some and shielded them, that lid, it's tight. It's really secured. And
Yeah.
the best I can do is fly higher just for
Hey, I love how y'all minds work. Like the different perspectives. Oh
them.
man. Me personally, even y'all got me so I didn't expect to get like even emotional thinking about this, but I realized that I'm out of the jar in ways that matter, but in the ways that I think matter most to me, I think I jump back in that jar. And now I
Yeah.
think, like, to be honest with myself, it's unwise at times. Like you said, like life is a individual experience, and you do your best to step outside and move forward. But I also know that when you show somebody, you step back in that jar and you say the lid is off, and you jump out and then jump back in at the risk to not being able to get out again,
Yes.
somebody is more likely to jump out with you. And I also look at like some of
Mm.
my family members because this speaker was talking about how every family has one person that shifts everyone's perspective, right? That and the family is always different after you. I'm not him.
Mm,
Him came 3 generations ago. Him was my dad. Him was these different people. So jumping out of the jar means so much more. Like the jar is a
mhm,
lot bigger that I got to jump out of. And I feel like the best thing I can do is the jar doesn't exist anymore for us, right? You people have the ability to jump in and jump back out of the jar. And I just wanted to appreciate I appreciate y'all's perspective because I had never looked at it that way until Zuri's talking about what type of jar do you have, and then Marcus like define your jar and is the lid on or off, and then just the authenticity and the breakdown. I didn't expect it to go that far, so we're not gonna stay at this whole episode on that. But I want you in your cars wherever you're listening to really dig into this question yourself. Like, if I'm a flea in the jar, am I still there? What does it take to jump out? How do I approach it once I get out and my loved ones are still inside that jar? And I'll go ahead. I want to transition into our guest cooking, Mr. Marcus Wiley himself. Tumbi Adegun, the crown fits correctly. Come on.
The
Come on.
crown fits me well.
You fits
Alafia.
him well.
No,
Hey,
the
Alafia.
crown fits me well.
Yeah, so
Last
going
I need.
So even like reading my man's bio, I'm gonna let you like break down how you met him as well, come out a little bit, just going into favorite failures. But it's one of those things where you have a discussion with someone and you get that black urge to be like, man, I'm trying to get like you. Like, it just boils up inside you, like I'm trying to get like you. just like talking about spiral dynamics and stoicism and his different perspectives and the way he views life. And it's one thing to view life a certain way, and it's another thing to view life a certain way and then live based on how you view it.
Mm,
That's a
mm,
powerful thing. And
mm,
this brother, to me, exemplifies that. So I just
oh,
want to say
wow.
I'm honored to have this
I received
conversation with
that.
you. We are to share this
Mm,
space with you. And I wanted to give you the floor to you,
mm.
Kamau, just to break down like how you met this man, right? How did
Wow,
this
I
come
really
about?
received that.
Yeah, and absolutely. I think to pick up where you one of the things that you said is you get that black urge to be like, man, I'm trying to get like you.
Yeah.
Me and this brother, we met in a coffee shop, and for 40 minutes of the conversation, I did not know his name. I we just hopped right in and we just got right to it. And I have a tendency to do that, but it's rare that I meet somebody else who's just so comfortable flowing. We could have talked for 2 hours, didn't care about that part. We just it was to me, it was clear that not only was he intelligent, that he was accomplished, that he had purpose in his life, and that more than anything, that there was something that I could learn from him. And that's what the whole conversation was for me. It's
Wow.
I spent a lot of time being quiet, and I'm a pretty talkative person. So if I'm being quiet, somebody got something good to say. So I'm
Wow.
excited to talk with Marcus.
So,
Thank
so
you.
So,
Wow.
Marcus, we want to give the floor to you in the form of favorite failures. So, this is a
Mm,
segment we usually want to do. We want to make it prominent and just breaking it down. It's exactly what it sounds like. What is a failure you've been through that at the time you were like, sheesh, this may be one of the ones to break me. This may be one of the ones to steal
mm,
my dream, my vision. Like,
mm,
I can't
mm,
move forward anymore.
mm,
Then, on
mhm,
the other side of it, like this may be one of the best things that ever happened to me. This is a
mm,
favorite. I don't get to look at the world the way I do if this didn't happen. I'm not sitting where I'm sitting right now
mhm,
if this didn't happen.
mm.
So take your time and talk to us. What is a favorite failure of yours?
Well, if you
Or
would
20?
prevent me,
Yeah, please
no, no,
cook.
no. If you would prevent me, if you would present me the grace, or allow me the grace, rather, to share how I actually met this gentleman, Kamau.
Please.
Um, I actually knew of him in terms of passing. So I came to Puerto Vallarta in November of 2022. I stayed at a hotel here in the city. And here in Mexico, there are Black people, right? But it's one of those things where it's like, want to? What up? Like it's one of those things where, one is cool, two is like, you weren't even on my flight. Like, what? And when I was staying at this hotel, they had this co-working space upstairs. And at the time I was working virtually as well. But I noticed him because he was in the corner. My man had like the things. He was like, I'm working, I'm doing things. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I'm here, I'm showing up, I'm coming in high. And I was so impressed by that because I was like, oh wow, like so Black people do come, like he's working here, like maybe he lives here. And I was fascinated by it, but I didn't really make the connection of actually speaking. One, because he was in flow, he was doing the things, and I didn't want to interrupt that. And two, I was just amazed by it. I was like, okay, wow. I saw him probably 3 or 4 days. This was back in November. I'm going somewhere with this. I then moved here probably March, Aprilish, and I was staying in Versailles, which is down further, if you will, kind of away from the beach. And I was on the hunt for a barbershop because I don't know if you've
Mm,
noticed, I'm a man of color in Mexico.
Tell
And
them about the struggle.
it's a real situation because I'm gonna tell you something. Life is different with no edges. You see what I'm saying? So you can't be messing up with God. Is I can't be
come on
drawing it
now.
back. I can't be drawing it back. Okay, I don't got another 38 years to draw this back, bro. And saw him coming out of the barbershop, and I was like, yo, that's my brother. And again, me being me, I've always kind of existed from this observational standpoint. I've never really been very assertive in that way. So I just kind of let it be what it was. I was like, damn, I didn't recognize that I had seen him before. I just let it be what it was. And then I would run every morning, and I would pass this coffee shop here, a coffee stand, and I was building my routine as I typically do when when you're nomadic, it helps. And I've been going to this coffee shop every day for probably the past 6 weeks, 7 weeks. And the young lady that works there, oh, she was so kind to me. And she was like helping me like pronounce my Spanish, and we'd go back and forth. And then one day there's another black guy there. Again, never seen another black person in the same space. And I was just wrapping with this with a client. I do coaching, executive coaching, creativity coaching, things like that. And he was standing there, and I thought maybe I was in the way or something. And he was like, "Hey, excuse me, you got a minute?" And he just introduced himself, and we just went into this deep dive for like 40 minutes. I didn't get to say anything until we were leaving. And I just want to give credence to that, because you have to be willing to just say yes and like just move about the world, open and curious, right? Do you know how many things had to go right for us to not only have like to be here in this space presently, but I saw this young man 6 months ago
Mm.
and didn't speak. Do you know how much has to go right for that moment to repeat itself 6 months later? What are the odds?
Yeah.
I just thought that was powerful, and it really moved me, because I was like, whoa, that's divine intervention. Because what are the odds? What are the odds? And then when we were talking about barbershop, I ended up going to the same barbershop that he recommended to me. And I was like, bro, this is crazy. It was almost like God was like, no, you're going to run it. You're going to see. You're going to see. I'm going to make sure of it.
Yeah.
I thought that was fine. That was fascinating to me. Favorite failure. I struggle with that. And I'll tell you why. Because I think I have found favor in my failure, right?
Hmm.
So I don't know that I have a favorite one, as much as I really am deeply connected to the process,
Mm.
because the process of failure is truly how you learn. In my experience, at least, you don't know what you don't know until you fuck it up,
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
then you're like, oh, I can go about this in a different way. And the reason I say I have found my favor in failures is because what you didn't sometimes, what I didn't succeed in wasn't for me to succeed in.
Talk.
And I think that we live in a culture that's so performative
Mm.
that failure is taken as a loss. But failure is the greatest lesson.
Yeah.
And I think many of us don't know how to fail. And so if you don't know how to fail, then you won't find the favor of failure. In which I think, again, I've had a life of just the vicissitudes, been like up and down, just a roller coaster ride of success, and then boom, you're making this much money, and then you're making no money, and then you're this and you're that. So I've just held true to that principle of you just don't know what you don't know. And when the moment meets you, to make the decision to learn or to mourn an opportunity, I'm gonna always go for the learning,
Mm.
because what's for you can't escape you, right? So like what you're pursuing it's pursuing you through your failure. So if your goal is to be, this person or whatever, let's say your goal is to be a physician, to be a doctor, right? And you're failing quizzes, you're failing exams, but it's good that you're failing exams, because these are just exams. Please don't fuck up on me, right?
Talk. Talk.
So it's one of those things where
That's
if
real.
you learn how to fail, you can just kind of take those things as opportunities of growth, man. So for me, that's a tough one. That's a tough one, because I lean into every failure like, oh, okay, this
Could
is a
you
good one. This is a good one.
could you pick out like one? You said something like, "I'll go from making so much money to making
Oh
no
yeah.
money." Could
Mhm,
you
mhm.
pull out one of those for us? Like, and that process.
Well, I want to preface this with this way, yeah, speaking about money, because I think so much of us connect money to some level of success,
Mm-hmm.
or we think that money, like there's a bear there. Money is not the only currency. So I want to
Talk.
just first throw that out there.
Talk.
I want to just throw that
I
out
know
there.
Zuri about to go off. Like, talk.
So I can tell you, wow. Mm, again, it goes to this performative nature that's innate within all of us, that we kind of
Yeah.
have to shed. It's part of leaving the jar. And the
Yeah.
reason that some of us don't leave that jar, right, is because she ain't moving. He ain't moving. I'm supposed to be in here.
Mm.
So if Zuri comes buzzing around, they're looking at her like, oh, she's such too much. She this, she that. And Zuri's like, no, come on up. Come on up. No, I
Yeah.
can't do that. I didn't go to college. I don't know how to read. And Zuri's like, girl, you can just fly. Just come on, just jump up. I don't know. My mama said I can't go outside. And yeah, I think I'm gonna stay in here. The housewives is coming on. It's the reunion. Zuri's like, girl, come on. We got to get out of here. He about to come back with the lid.
Yeah.
Like, no, I mean, you won't come back. I'm never coming back.
Talk.
Never coming back to the job. I'm never doing it. I can eat all out here. Come on and join me. So I think that that performative nature, and I think we might have touched on this very briefly on the live. It's like it's so innate within our culture to subconsciously audition for acceptance
Mm.
of people who don't accept themselves.
Mm.
So it's wild. It's really wild to me. And what I've learned in that process is people. Mm, do I want to say it that way? Okay, I'm gonna say it this way. People, oof, people will judge you. People will judge you, dismiss you, condemn you on just the speculation of your image, just the speculation of failure. And God will love you with the evidence. So
Come on.
when you have
Oh,
that type of
oh.
experience, you look at it like the game is rigged, bro. The game is rigged because there's really no reason for me to try to do what you do well. I don't have the bandwidth. It's not what I'm supposed to do. You think these are arguing with Flea? You know what I mean? So it's one of those things, just because you're doing it and it's your moment and you're glowing up and you're doing well, that doesn't mean that that takes anything from me. In fact, your success opens the road for my success
Yeah.
because that's your thing. You're doing it. You know what I mean? And I think before you can really ask a question like, what's your favorite failure? And then like layer that in with like money being indicative of some type of success, I have to offer the preference that money is not the only currency. And success, by, by my definition, I share the definition that the gem Maya Angelou gave to us. Success is loving yourself, loving what you do, and loving how you do it. That's success to me.
Oh.
And when I've had the opportunity, because I've known success on many fronts, but those successes that were public successes were private failures, private
Mm.
losses, because it cost me too much. It cost me too much. I performed and I gave to a narrative that didn't give back to me.
Mm.
And so, yeah, I got the awards, I got the accolades, I got the salary, but I'm suicidal.
Mm.
Mm.
The air is thin up here.
Mm.
It's lonely up here. I'm the only flea up here.
Mm.
No one else is like me in this room. So my greatest lesson in failure is learn how to fail. Learn how to fail. And the greatest, I'm trying to think if there's one opportunity. If we're
If
talking
I,
about money,
no,
please.
so because I don't want you to feel like you have to go that route of currency, giving you
Mhm.
another option, something you said on the IG live that was super powerful, that I'm a collaboration of my parents. I am
Oh,
them.
absolutely.
So if I hate them,
Absolutely.
it's self-hate.
Oh my
And
God,
that
without question.
journey to go from and again, you also said that my father is still discovering how to be a man at the time. So how could I, be upset with him?
Oh,
Like that reflection piece. I think
mm,
in my perspective and learning to love my dad and accept him as who he was as a man, it was a lot of me failing to see him appropriately. And I had to grow through that failure, like my own. And Zuri talked about that as well, being able to look at yourself. And so if you could speak to that, and if any
yeah.
failure in that perspective, I think that's powerful too.
Yeah, man. So I think that we have a tendency, particularly, I mean, I guess this is kind of the blueprint of wholeness, like for me, my trajectory to kind of healing is excuse me, my father to me wasn't the best father, but I only knew him under the narrative of what a father was.
Mm.
based on what I had seen my other friends have.
Yep.
I didn't really long for anything from him because I had it in abundance in my like from my mom.
Mm,
Only knew that I didn't have a father when I saw other fathers.
mm,
So I think, what helped me heal, it's like I said earlier, DNA is memory. And so within yourself, within me, within Zuri, within all of us, you are the conscious coupling of everyone that came before you. You are the answered prayer of people who never got to see the promise. You are their promise. And when you carry that, you walk into a room differently and you recognize that the problems I face, these are not problems. There's solutions within me. You can go within yourself and find everything you need. There is
mm.
no there. I don't have to search for it outside of myself. I've got kings and queens and survivors in me, doctors and lawyers, innovators of their day. So instead of trying to conjure a solution and create something up, we got to get still enough to really see what's inside. Anatomically, we lack the ability to see inside of us. I can only see you all. I can see myself on the screen. Your eyes face outward. It takes diligent, deep work to turn those eyes on yourself because you've never seen inside of you. Come on, man. You've only seen outside of you. So going
Yeah.
inside of you, that's uncharted territory. I don't know what the hell I'm gonna find in there.
Mm,
And
mm.
then when you get inside, you realize this ain't mine.
Yeah.
This ain't mine.
Or that you don't like
This
it.
ain't.
Yeah.
And because so many, again, DNA is memory. He was never a slave. But my ancestor Benjamin Allen was a slave in 1855. So the slavery mentality, the mentality of oppression is innate within my being, right? But that's not my story.
Mm.
And so until you deal with the fact that that's where I've come from, but it's because of Benjamin Allen that I'll never be a slave again.
Hey,
He gave
boy.
his life for my
Hey,
freedom.
Hey, boy. Hey, boy. Hey, boy.
So being able then to recognize who you are, yeah, and whose you are, right?
Mm.
And the fact that people have prayed for you that you never met. You you haven't met everyone that's gonna love you. So when you approach life that way, it changes the game, man. It changes the game. And for me, kind of bringing it full circle, that's when I realized that money can't do that. Money can't do that. Character is the greatest
Talk.
currency you'll have.
Say it
Talk.
again.
Character is the greatest
Talk.
currency you will ever have. And I'm going to tell you
Boy.
why that is. Because character gets you things that money could never acquire. You can't purchase it. You can't learn it. You can't buy it. You can't sell it. You can't trade it. If you have character is the type of stuff that makes you say God is, so I am.
Hey, get me hype. Boy.
Character is
Come.
the type of stuff that says to you like freedom.
Hey.
Freedom is not having $100,000 in the bank. Freedom is being able to say no. I just don't want to do it,
And
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 being
this
okay with
Boy.
that.
this is why I wanted to bring on Marcus, because I feel like some of the rooms that he's been in,
Mm.
some of the checks that he's seen, I feel like, there's this one Jim Carrey quote that says, I wish everybody could be rich and famous so people realize that it's not the answer. And I feel like it sometimes, for some of us who've put so much stake and equity into that being the answer,
Mhm.
need that perspective from somebody who's been there and touched that, to
Yeah,
say,
man.
I've seen it.
I've been to the mountaintop. Okay,
Mhm.
Nah.
trust me,
I
trust me, trust
and
me, bro.
something so powerful you said that's gonna kind of lead us into the next segment. You said, I've been up there and the air is thin up there. Like you get
Yes.
suicidal up there. I was the only flea up there. Right. So to think that one of the most powerful things you can do is experiencing another flea being up there with you, more fleas being in these spaces. And it's not about the money. It's about the air gets thicker and more vibrant when we're there together.
But I got to
So
stop you with that. Ooh,
talk to me. Talk. This is
it's
my
falling
favorite
out.
part. This is
See,
my
the
favorite part.
problem, oh man, I can't bring you nowhere you don't want to be. So it's really difficult. It's really difficult for me to say, man, there's no other fleas here, right? Because when the jar was open, I love it.
Mm,
You got to want to leave.
yeah.
And what I'm saying that there's no there, the air is thin here, I'm the only one here. It's not, it's it's more so about learning how to be in the spaces that you find yourself in. It's unlearning all the things that you were told, right? You were
Mm,
told as a flea that you could jump 50 times your size. But what if in fact it was higher than that? What's the worst that's gonna happen if you aim for 100?
talk.
You gonna hit 50?
Talk.
So it's who has assigned you these limits? That's really what I was trying to get at. It's like whose
Mm,
narrative are you endorsing? And it's not until you read the story that someone else tells you about you that you recognize like that's not even my shit, bro. Like
yeah.
that's not for me. And so yeah, I mean, uh,
No,
like you were saying, go ahead, please.
no. I was just saying what's powerful about it is this next segment, pivoting to purpose with Zuri, is
Mm,
seeing stories like Marcus's, Zuri's, Kamau's, mine, for somebody that's younger, for somebody that's still in school. It's almost like fleas can jump that high and they see us jumping 50 and they're asking themselves, well, maybe I can jump 100. Right. So really that's what I get from the next segment, pivoting to purpose, is looking at somebody else's story and you get to kind of look at your own and question, yo, how high can I jump? So
mm.
Zuri, let's pivot into purpose. Let's figure out how high we can jump.
And before I pivot, I have
Talk.
to jump back just a little.
Talk.
I
I
cannot go
love it
into
here.
pivot into purpose without talking about something Marcus said that had me over here on a swivel. The fact that a lot of people do not know how to fail is one of the most powerful things you said on this episode. Because what I heard is there is favor in learning how to fail. And a lot of people are not granted that opportunity because of what you said, Marcus. People, maybe those ancestors didn't pray for that, but some ancestors did, right? Or maybe just being in an environment or in the jar where that lid, like you said, was so airtight that that type of favor just could not seep in, right? But learning how to fail, it's such a beauty in the word itself, in that just analogy in itself, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because if you put two people next to each other, the person who at least knows how to fail already knows that they are going to fail. So they're already ahead of the game. The person who has never been taught how to fail, who has never seen failure in their own jar, is already 10 steps behind. So any listener that is listening right now, if you have ever been in a situation where you had someone be emotionally aware enough, or someone in your corner, in your environment, or in your home where you grew up in, or friends in your community on the street, whatever it is, who could show you how to fail, you are further than you think you are if you are in the season of failing, if you are in the season of isolation, right? If you're seeing the season of isolation, as you all were talking about, the flea that's at the top in that thin air by itself, that's nothing but isolation. And God is the only person who can grant us isolation. So to wrap this up, if you are that flea at the top in thin air, you got out the jar, right?
Mm.
And if you learned how to fail, that is a blessing. And all you have to do is take that lesson and know that you're going to fail more, right? But learning how to fail is favor in itself. And to go into the next segment, it is named again, Pivot into Purpose. Pivot into Purpose is a segment where we invite the culture into our brand of Pivot and Proceed. A lot of times when you listen to this podcast, you'll hear us three co-hosts talk about our own stories, talk about how we've had to force a pivot in our life and we've had to force a mindset to see even how to move forward from that favorite failure, from that failed attempt. And today I want to talk about a young guy by the name of real name John, but he goes by DC Young Fly. And you might know him as a comedian. You might know him as, just a TV personality. But what a lot of people do not know, or they might know, is his relationship with God. And he puts his relationship on the forefront, right? And I was watching the Steve Harvey show interview just yesterday, and DC Young Fly was being interviewed. And again, before I want to preface this, what I'm about to say and what I'm about to give to this podcast, he did not say this in the interview. This is just what I received out of the interview. Mm. He started speaking, and you could tell his energy changed when he talked about a recent tragedy that has happened in his life when his girlfriend has recently passed away. And in that moment, you could see an instant energy change, right? The words that DC Young Fly was speaking was so prophetic. He wasn't speaking as a comedian. He wasn't speaking as a celebrity. He was speaking as someone who has profound words and who is touched by a prophetic word, right? And that made me think, even though we see him on this high horse as being a celebrity, what happens when you've already pivoted into your purpose, but God is putting a calling onto your life? So how do you pivot from a purpose to a calling? And I want to challenge the other three co-hosts that I have today. One, is that possible? And two, when you find yourself there where tragedy and trauma has led you now to a calling that you never foresaw in your own life, what happens when you pivot from your purpose to a calling?
Who wants to take that first?
Go ahead. If you cook and cook.
I believe that you're called according to God's purpose. I think that a calling is never separate from a purpose. So I would then, I would question the question of saying, perhaps this is placing him on his purpose. I think we may accept his purpose as being DC Young Fly because that's how we know him. That's the purpose he served the army. But that could just be him being, again, talented at what he does and having the opportunities present themselves and him taking full advantage of those opportunities. That could be his purpose for him. Like that could be that could be his vision for his life. But I think that God has his own purpose for us, and God has a calling that's separate to that. And I don't know. I think, is it possible to transition from my purpose to God's purpose? Absolutely. I think it's required. Because on that side of the fence, Zuri, I got everything I need. It gives you access to everything you could possibly need. It's the grace that I've gained, and like you were saying, in that favor of failing, right? That to me is, that space where you're like, okay, this is gonna hurt a bit, but what can I take from this? That grace that's attached to God's favor and God's purpose for my life. God uses everything. Everything adds up. And so how do you pivot from that into the purpose is very much like you just so well said. Recognize that failure puts you forward, right? And don't judge it against anybody else's. That is probably the greatest advice I think we can give is don't judge your success or failure or effort on anyone else's anything. Because the reality of it is you don't know what it cost them. You don't know what it cost them. When I look at someone like DC Young Fly who is successful and doing what he's doing as a comedian, he is actually really funny. But when you think about it, do you know what it's like to lose someone you love intimately? A girlfriend at that? Like someone you've dated, someone you're building a life with. To lose that person that's a heavy lift, my love. Like that's a heavy lift. So I think it's a dangerous game when you start comparing yourself to other people and how they got where they are and this, that, and forth and all of that. I don't want to, go too further, like too down on it, but I think you pivot accordingly. I think it's possible. I do think it's possible, and I think it's required. I definitely think it's required.
Yeah, I'll say absolutely. Like so much love to DC Young Fly in this time, losing the mother of his
Mm,
children.
that's not.
And it was like just the alignment. I was picking my sister up and my mom from a flight from Miami because they went to celebrate their birthday, and he was on the flight with them. And she was like, something was different. She had no idea about the news, but he had just found out, and he was coming back home to Atlanta and just speaking to the space he was in. So to even share air with somebody while they're going through that is just different. And something you said, Marcus, that was so powerfully said, being DC Young Fly was his vision for his life. But you can have 2020 vision and still you only see so far, even for yourself. And I think into like God knew you before there was a time, right? And you were something more than DC Young Fly to God, right? Even as special as that is on this earth, like a callback to the Rumi quote, the truth was a mirror in the hands of God. It fell, broke into pieces. Everybody took a piece, looked at it, and thought they had the truth. So even us, we only have a version of our own journey, a vision. And it's like a staircase. You climbing up that staircase, and DC Young Fly is your purpose, but now you're on the 6th step going to the 7th. And the 7th step is now you're calling. God's like, okay, now that you figured out all these steps, keep stepping up. And you like, you on the 6th step? Like, nah, I'm Gucci. Like, this is, I like step 6, right? But nah, God's like, you just needed to get to step 6 for step 7, right? All of this, everything that you thought was magical, that was the dream, you just thought you jumped out of the jar and that was it. Like, nah, now it's the world, baby. Now we really gonna have you in the world in this calling. So to me, I look at it like a staircase. I look at it like you can only see so far, so much of your mirror. And then God hands you this other piece, like, okay, yeah, here you go. And you're like, no, I don't. Sometimes I don't want this piece. It could cut my hand. It's rough edges. I got to low key start over because I've mastered this craft and I needed it for the next one. So I see it as just like another step in the journey. Another step in the journey.
What I admire about DC Young Fly, just I've met him less than a handful of times, but what I admire about his story from a close, knowing a lot of people who are close to him, who spend a lot of time, quality time with him, is that dude has been through hard times. Like this is not the first one. He has lost some very close people in his life. He's been through some he's faced death. He's looked death in the face. He's been to the very low depths of what life can do. I think he's seen such low things. He's also seen very high things, but I feel like because of what he's seen while he was so down, gave him that relationship. Gave him that relationship with God that there is no other way forward. This is the only way through. And when you're tested with that, it's like just that difficult, but to get to where he's gotten through from where he's came from, that was God. And I feel like this is another battle. This is another mountain that he has to climb, but clearly he is capable, clearly he has that relationship with God where he is capable. So in terms of this pivoting into purpose, the word that I guess just comes to my mind that he has very well packed is faith. He has faith in something that he doesn't understand. And I feel like that's required to to conquer any mountain. You know, there's so many times that we have hard shit in our lives that it's so frustrating, it's so debilitating, it's so scary, it's all of the things, and yet we don't understand. Why, God? Why do I gotta suffer?
Talk. Talk.
Why? We don't understand. Faith doesn't require you to.
Mm.
And I feel like to have faith is to be able to do everything truly. So to pivot into God's calling for you, I think you just have to walk by faith, and that's what the brother's trying to do as best as he can.
To wrap this segment up, it's really a beautiful thing. Because I think the difference sometimes with pivoting into purpose and then finding out your calling that's been put on your life is sometimes most people see your calling before you see it.
Mm.
That
And
part.
especially if you
That
are
part.
and especially if you are in tune with God and if you are in tune with yourself, people will see the calling on your life before you do. And until you get there, until God brings you to that calling, you might be confused. It might be smoky mirrors for you. You might be in the dark,
Come on, Zuri.
but you have to walk through that dark to get to the light of what your calling is. And this example of DC Young Fly, I see it as that dark portion, right? I see it as that walking through the dark. I see it as those experiences, those favorite failures, those unfortunate deaths that just keep et cetera, going on and on. But once you see that light of the calling on your life, everything starts to make sense. That mirror is now clear as day. And you're seeing yourself, and you're also seeing the people behind you that God placed behind you to follow you into your own calling, to help those people behind you that you see in that reflection. So as you all are listening, you know, I just want to leave our listeners with that just on their plate for their appetite. Even if you are pivoting into your purpose, or if you're not even there yet to know if you even need to pivot into your purpose, just always remember that a calling is also on your life.